Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. Let's talk about the steps to winning your multiple sclerosis disability claim and the gold standard test that disability carriers expect to see. The first thing I think you need to do if your doctor has told you to stop work is not to stop work until you get your disability insurance policy out. We need you to read that policy cover to cover or get a consultation with a lawyer such as myself. Why? Well, first, we want to see how the policy defines disability, occupation, self-reported limitations, and other particular relevant terms in the disability policy. We want you to understand what it is you need to prove and whether or not there are any policy limitations that we need to understand right off. Some policies say that you have to have objective evidence of diagnosis or restrictions and limitations before they'll pay the benefits. And as a result, if you don't have that objective evidence, the disability policy may say, well, there's also a requirement that your benefits be limited to just 2 years if there is a subjective condition. And many times the symptoms of MS, and particularly in the early stages, can be highly subjective and not corroborated by diagnostic studies. The next thing you need to do is get a copy of your medical records and review them to see what your doctors had to say about you, your symptoms, your functionality, the objective basis of the diagnosis. And you also want to be talking to your physician as to whether or not they support the claim. That's particularly important because if your doctor doesn't support your claim, we want to find a new doctor as quickly as possible. The other thing that we're looking for in these medical records is a history of depression. And it's not uncommon for folks who have MS to have problems with depression. The reason we're looking at that is there might be a mental nervous condition limitation in the policy that limits benefits to just 2 years if your disability is caused or contributed to by depression. So we want to understand that. The next thing we want to do is to get a copy of your job description. And we want to understand the definition of occupation in the terms of your policy. Is the policy definition of occupation as your occupation is performed by your employer, or is it performed in the national economy or pursuant to the Dictionary of Occupational Titles? So we want to understand that. We also want to provide this information to your doctor because ultimately your doctor is going to be filling out attending physician statement forms. Now, once you have got your medical records, you've reviewed them, you've got your policy, and you understand what it is you need to prove, I also think that it's important that you consider doing a diary, that it will explain your symptoms, your functionality, the side effects of medication, so that we can tie this all together. And how are we going to tie it together? Well, the disability carrier is expecting that you're going to have an MRI. And undergoing an MRI is never pleasant, but it will play a crucial role in not only diagnosing the MS, but monitoring the progression of your symptoms and help us tie this all together. The MRI is the gold standard test for MS because it shows subtle changes in the disease that are not observable by other testing like X-rays or CT scans. The MRI will show not only the presence of a lesion, but whether it's actively demyelinating. The MS damages the fatty myelin layer, which protects nerve cells from water. And as a result, the MRI will see the water. That's the result of the myelin being stripped as a result of the multiple sclerosis process. Since it's a non-invasive test and it's the basis for the diagnosis, the disability carrier is going to want to see that you've undergone the MRI and the results of the MRI. Now, once you're on claim, the carrier is going to expect to see that you get additional MRIs as recommended by your doctor. And they're always interested in the status of your MS. Now, many times in the initial stages of MS, the MRI is inconclusive. And that means that there's not necessarily a gold standard test available, but it's important to try to get around that by documenting in your medical records your symptoms and how those symptoms are impacting your functionality. That's why I think the diary is important. I also think that it is important that you understand whether or not you need that objective testing immediately off the bat. And if not, how potentially we're going to get around the lack of objective testing. One of the ways we'll do that is to try to educate your physician about the importance of a comprehensive physical examination, the elimination of other causes of your symptoms, and then kind of correlating your symptoms and your functionality with the nature of the disease. Now, as the nature of the disease progresses, we're going to get the MRI. And the disability carrier is going to be, as I've said, looking at that MRI. The MRI may be confirming of the MS, but the MRI may not necessarily be confirming the severity of your MS. And again, that's important for you to document that information by keeping a diary. What are your symptoms? How do your symptoms impact your ability to function? Are they relapsing? Are they remitting? Are you in a stage of remission? How long is the remission lasting? When you have your next episode, is it different than your earlier episodes? How is it different? What are your symptoms? How are your symptoms impacting your functionality? Are you developing other issues, such as visual issues? Are you developing problems with concentration, problems with balance or coordination? So regardless of your symptoms, I think documentation is key, particularly if you're having episodes of remission. Because the carrier tends to say, if you're in an episode of remission, you are not disabled and you're able to work. And we want to document the frequency and nature of the relapses and the remissions. That becomes key, again, when you are filling out these activity of daily living forms that will try to nail you down in terms of your symptoms and your functionality. And I think your doctor needs this kind of information to make sure that we have an accurate record of the nature of your symptoms, the progression of your symptoms, and how those symptoms impact your ability to function. Now, even though you may be on claim, as I've said, the disability carrier is going to want to see repeat scans. And that's particularly true if you have relapsing and remitting MS, because the carrier doesn't understand the different forms of MS, and particularly relapsing and remitting MS. So ultimately, when we have a series of scans that will show the progression of the disease and the period of time between the relapses and reoccurrences become shorter, we can tie this all together, both physically based on your exam findings, the MRI findings, and testing such as neuropsychological testing or visual testing. So I think that you need to understand that as the disease progresses, not only is the MRI important, but objective testing, neuropsychological testing or visual testing or whatever is going to be just as crucial as the MRI, because we've got to tie together the findings of the MRI to the progression of the disease and the involvement of other body systems. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this week's episode. If you like this podcast, consider liking our page, leaving a review, or sharing it with your friends and family. Remember, this podcast comes out weekly, so stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks.
Are you a professional with questions about your individual disability policy? You need the Disability Insurance Claim Survival Guide for Professionals. This book gives you a comprehensive understanding of your disability policy with tips and to-dos regarding your disability application that will assist you in submitting a winning disability application. This is one you won't want to miss. For the next 24 hours, we are giving away free copies of the Disability Insurance Claim Survival Guide for Professionals. Order yours today at disabilityclaimsforprofessionals.com.